Brief introduction about James. James has a really fascinating background, starting with computer science, moving into HR and people leadership, and also with a really strong focus on mental health in the workplace. If you haven't heard it, he has a fantastic podcast called Silent Superheroes, and he did an impromptu podcast session about the same topics that we're going to discuss today. So if you're not a huge note taker, that is fine. One, you can refer back to the podcast. Two, if it's okay with everybody on this call, we're actually planning to record this so that we can share. So speak now or forever hold your tongue, and I'm going to hit record before James kicks us off.
Oh, it's already recording.
It is?
Yeah. At least it is on my end.
Yes, it is already recording. We're good there.
I can't see it, but thank you, somebody, for recording, Lindsay. Okay, so James, here's what we thought we would do. James is going to kick us off and just touch on kind of what's going on. Why are we experiencing such high levels of anxiety on multiple levels? And then it's really meant to be Ask Me Anything, so open to questions that you have for James. And if you don't have enough questions, I have some that we can use to fill in. But James, over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Mikaela, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. Thanks for taking some time today. So, as I watched the sort of discussion in the HR community sort of unfurl around this topic, we were dealing with a lot of the obvious things like, what's the right way to, furlough employees or to transition people to working at home? How do we do I-9s now that in theory we shouldn't be sort of face-to-face with, with people? But it was notable to me that one thing I hadn't seen much discussion around was the topic of mental health. And the reason that's important, I think, in this particular time is that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Touch woods, none of us will ever have to go through something like this again, where like the whole world is in kind of a lockdown situation. And so these are very unusual times. And one of the things that is resoundingly true about humans is that we don't like change. We all cope with change, but many humans don't just kind of embrace change. And we also don't like uncertainty. And there's a great deal of uncertainty right now about when's the next, shoe going to drop in terms of kind of restrictions on how we live, our lives. What's going to happen in my company? Is my job safe? So there's a lot of uncertainty. And those two things together can create a great deal of anxiety for people. Whether you have an anxiety disorder or not, they are creating stress and worry. And many of us are getting through it because we have to. It's like Mikaela has to keep running her business, right? And so you kind of put that anxiety to one side, and you get on with it. But it's there. For some people, it's going to be more acute than others. On the other hand, a lot of companies, particularly in the Seattle area where we're very tech focused, have to create kind of more social distance between people, have sent employees to work at home, which of course they're terrifically fortunate to be able to do. But if you're sent to work from home, you're not having that day-to-day contact that you would usually have with other people every day. And we might not know that we need it, but we need it. We're still very much a tribal species who need to be with other people on a day-to-day basis. And so those, I think, are two of the big mental health impacts we are seeing and we will continue to see. Increased levels of anxiety and increased levels of social isolation as a result of, for many people working from home. So those are the areas that, I think it would be great to have some sort of dialogue, some Q&A around today. And I'll pause there because that may provide enough of a jumping off point for people. But if not, I can keep talking a little longer, or Mikaela can start asking questions, whatever serves the community.
It looks like everybody is still muted for the moment. I want to pick up on something that you said, James, which is that people are going to have different levels of anxiety given the uncertainty right now. And it may impact everyone differently, and regarding your personal living situation, regarding whether you are predisposed to anxiety. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe help understand both who might be at more risk and how can we, without being intrusive, how can we identify people who are at greater risk, or at least make sure that they have the support and resources that they need?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And let's start with people, excuse me, who already have and experience anxiety. So that might be in the form of generalized anxiety, sometimes called generalized anxiety disorder, or other anxiety-related disorders like OCD or PTSD as examples. So where we have people like that in our workforces or our home lives, those people are likely to need more support at this time. If you think about the kind of the broad circumstances that we're in, somebody who has elderly relatives, perhaps parents, somebody who is going through something like cancer, where you may be doing chemo and be immunosuppressed, those people are at more risk from this disease, and so those are people who might need extra care and attention. People who have school-aged children. I have two daughters, and my wife and I have overnight become parent teachers, which is something I never thought would happen. And so that is, parents are under new and different stresses. People who have histories of substance abuse. I've talked in public many times about, sort of my mental health and a history of, substance abuse. Somebody like that might find themselves under increased stress, more likely to abuse whatever their substance of choice is. Somebody who's in a domestic abusive relationship is now with their abuser 24 hours a day, potentially. So there are a lot of groups out there who are, who are at sort of greater risk of increased anxiety. A couple more, sorry, that come to mind. I have a good friend who has a pretty big germaphobe. And so for him, incredibly stressful time, although, I say this with love, like he has the tools to kind of manage the germ situation because he's used to doing it. And I have a friend who's recently separated from his partner, and they're kind of trying to navigate and figure out, who's looking after the kid and things like that. And, he's at more risk because he's sort of on his own now, sort of from the social isolation side. So there are a lot of people out there who certainly would be under greater stress at this time.
I see a question popped up from Adrian. Let me see if I can navigate this well. Yeah, Lindsay, can you help? My chat just came and went.
Oh, I can see it here. So,
you got it.
Yeah, Adrian says, what advice do you have about how to use social media in a healthy way? The amount of public shaming and judgment of others is exhausting, and I try to avoid it, but right now I feel like social media is an important way to stay connected with others. Yeah, you're right. That's tricky, and that's another thing that's creating a lot of anxiety and stress. In the podcast, one of the guests mentions how, because of the uncertainty, we're probably trying to fill that uncertainty with new information. And so we're just like hitting Facebook, I know I'm doing this. Like I'm hitting Facebook much more frequently than I usually would. I think one thing you can do is you can treat yourself perhaps like a child, and you could set yourself kind of amount of social media time a day. So you could do, say, going to check it in the morning, I'm going to check it in the evening, and for the rest of the day, I'm just going to stay away from it because although things are moving fast, they're not moving that fast, right? Morning and evening, to me, feels like it would be sufficient to check in. I think, on Apple products, you can set limits for social media. So you could set a more aggressive limit for yourself so that you'll get a warning and it will kind of shut off your social media apps. You can mute people. So if there are people out there that are, stirring things up or spreading disinformation, you could mute them as well. So those are, I guess, three ideas that come off the top of my head.
I would just add to that there's the silver lining, and there are people out there who are connecting, supporting each other, and doing really great work in the community. And so spending the time to do in real life, spending the time with the people who give you energy and the people who are keeping up the outlook is something that I've found it's actually uplifting, right, to see how people rally together.
Yeah.
I want to come back to you, James. You were talking about a lot of populations who might be at risk, and some of those would be known to us. So, for instance, no parents are, but you mentioned a lot of other circumstances that we just might not be aware of. And I know we have a lot of people on this call with, HR leadership backgrounds who want to be sensitive to privacy, not wanting to pry into people's personal lives. So what's the best way to be helpful in that case?
I think in this situation, the thing to look for, perhaps, if you don't already know it, but let me start this answer again. You don't have to look at the population someone's in to see that somebody's sort of challenged or struggling in some way. So I'm gonna kind of I don't know if this is like some mental health education, but we all have like mental health, right? And our state of, let's say, happiness kind of goes up and down over time, right? Mikaela is, most of the time I've seen her happy, and occasionally I've seen her kind of stressed. I've never seen her down, but like she has a continuum, right? And I have a broader and potentially more dangerous range in terms of like my kind of mood. I can go from extremely happy and hypomanic through to quite seriously depressed. And the difference between Mikaela and I is that sometimes the swings of my mood affect my ability to function, right? Like if I'm depressed, doing stuff is really, really hard because I'm just kind of lower than where most people can get. So I bring this up to say that I think what we all need to be watching for is people who are behaving outside either their norm or kind of outside the norm of the general population. So to give maybe it's a silly example, but everyone's washing their hands more. But if there's someone who's washing their hands every 10 minutes, that might be a sign that there's something going on for them. And so I would be looking for people whose behavior is kind of outside their normal range. And that might tell you that there's something that's going on. People might hide it, right? We're all very good at hiding our emotions. You might not see it, but those are the things I'd be looking for. People whose behavior as it relates to kind of how they're interacting with others, their mood volatility, their level of stress. Look for people who are operating significantly outside the norm and ask them, hey, how you doing? Seems like you're more stressed than you usually are. Want to talk about it? And kind of you're opening the door for them.
Thanks, James. We have a question from Mylene. Organizations are having conversations about holding on hiring so can better understand how COVID-19 impacts business. We're going through this conversation. In general, we try to be cognizant of work-life balance as we can for our team. But if we need to hold on hiring, it's likely we'll need to ask more of our current team. How do you recommend?
Okay. I lost the end of that question, but I can see it here.
Okay.
So, I mean, maybe I'm going to challenge an assumption that's in the question first and then try and answer it. And the assumption is that if you hold off on hiring, you need to ask more from your current team. And I would ask, do you need to ask more from your current team? So, first thing to, to think about. I think this is one of those tricky questions about, and so now moving on to kind of how should we have these conversations without further impacting. This is one of those tricky conversations where we are challenged by striking a balance, right? It's that challenge we face in so many decisions in, HR, between kind of like there's what we want to do or what we think is morally the right thing to do, and then there's what the business wants to do, and kind of how do we find the middle grounds, the middle ground for those things. I think that when people are dealing with uncertainty, clarity is very helpful. If you're going to have to stop hiring, being clear about, hey, we're going to have to stop hiring, and our intention is, when when this crisis is over, we'll start hiring again. What does that mean? For a period of time, we're going to ask, to do as best we can with the resources that, that we have. We want to support you and your mental health, your families, etc. Whatever, right? Whatever you want to say to, to balance it. But, everybody here is part of a business. Those businesses need to continue to function. That's actually the right thing for the employees. So communicating clearly with them, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do, and you'll reduce uncertainty by doing it. Anything to add, Mikaela?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say, I mean, this is a really hard time, and people can come together in hard times. And, I recognize most of the names here, and you're all parts of teams and organizations that are really passionate about what they do and mission driven. And I think if this is a temporary ask, James said, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, that people can really rally together and rally around it. So even though it's a hard time, I just think with the purpose and mission that I know all of you have, that helps, right? When people feel like it's just a grind or their work doesn't matter, it's much hard if you do need to ask people to do more.
You make me think, despite economic theory saying that people are inherently selfish, I don't believe that to be true. And I think, if there are opportunities for, the communities in your company to come together and help others, support other, businesses, vulnerable groups, whatever it might be, that could be something to bring people together around, and actually could be a net benefit.
Let's focus on the individual for a second, James. And I know one thing you talked about on the podcast was the importance of routines. And I wonder if you could just share with people, both for themselves as well as their teams, now that almost everybody is working from home. What are some of those routines, and why is it so important for people to keep up their routines while they're home?
Yeah, I think it's the sense and feeling of structure for people. Again, that feeling of certainty and order in the world. I'm somebody who's more comfortable than I'd like with a sort of lack of routine and schedule, but actually, for me, that's extremely bad for me. And so, trying to keep your routine as much much like its normal routine as possible. So, getting up at similar time, getting dressed, setting a time that you're going to get to work. So you're going to get to your desk, open things up, making sure you set time aside for lunch, and kind of leave your desk as much as you can, trying to make it like you're doing your usual job in your office, you're just doing it in a different place. And I think the long-term risk is that, we talk a lot about work-life balance. I haven't always agreed with that concept because it puts work and life like on the same level, which it's like work is part of life in my mind. But whatever you want to call it, the more those things blend together, the more stress and burnout that will create, because there won't be that delineation of time to kind of recharge and be yourself, and your time that you're doing work.
One of the guests on your podcast mentioned setting an alarm, which I thought was a great idea. I haven't yet done this, but set an alarm for when your work day ends so that you can really shut everything down and transition. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah. The other one, it was funny, I was speaking to a client in another country yesterday, and they're a little behind us, in their trajectory, but she said she realized she had spent about a week, not showering every day, not dressing for work, and she started to feel really sluggish, and so she started doing those things. The other one is a lot of us get most of our outdoor time and possibly exercise during our commute. And so one of the things I know that even happened to me was for a couple of days, I got really comfortable and I had, my new blanket and my home office set up. And then I just kind of looked around and I was like, I haven't gotten outside. I've spent an entire day or two without going outside and also without exercising. And so being really intentional about both of those things.
Yeah. It's another one of those things that I think is very fundamental at a species level, which is being in nature. And, at this point in time, nature can just be underneath the sky. You don't have to be out in the Cascade somewhere. You can just be under the sky. So definitely getting outside is very, very important. And to the point about setting the alarm, one of the things that was very smart about that example is that it exposes there are hidden cultural cues that happen in our workday, right? So at some point late in the day, people start getting up and walking out of the building. And unless you're completely absorbed in your work, that is the sign that at some point I need to get up and walk out of the building. I need to stop working for the day. And obviously, when we're all working at home, we don't have those physical cues around us. As she pointed out, work blurs very much into life. And I'm actually wondering, as I'm sat here, if there are other physical cues that we see at work that we're not seeing right now. One obviously would be lunch, people getting up and going for their lunch, for sure. I'll let that process in the background, see if I can figure out any other clues.
Yeah. Let's turn to something a little bit upbeat. So I've seen a lot of posts and I've heard from people different fun ways that they're connecting with the team and keeping people engaged while everyone is distributed. Rachel Coogan isn't here today, but I saw Rachel post they had done things like they played online Pictionary as a team, and I've heard people have done like virtual coffee breaks or just keep Zoom open and have lunch together. Bring your pets on the screen. But I'm curious, either James or anybody really, are there some new and creative ways that you're seeing that people are staying connected?
I'm consciously pausing just to give somebody else an opportunity to speak. I think you alluded to my favorite one that I have seen so far, which was the online pet happy hour. I forget which, I think it's Udemy are doing it. And I've seen, it's a Zoom meeting like this, except it's got, sort of 20 people's pictures in it. And each of those pictures has somebody with their dog or their cat or whatever other pet they might have. And just people hanging out with their pets, having a chat. And I thought that was pretty cool.
about resiliency, if you would.
Sorry, say again.
Resiliency. What can we rely on ourselves to be resilient, and if they are struggling, how can they find that resiliency?
Yeah, good question. Maybe first thing to point out is that we all have, again, sort of a natural resiliency. We all have that capability within us, and I think one of the things we'll see coming through this is we've all learned a lot about us from a resiliency perspective. I think one of the ways to build resiliency is to kind of work with others when we are facing times that kind of are difficult and challenging. And I think it helps to enable you to zoom out a little bit. We can get stuck in like this issue, this problem that's very big, and have talk with somebody and just kind of help zoom back and maybe put things into a different context can kind of help us keep moving forward. So I think that's one thing that comes into my head. And then I think you said, how do you build resiliency? I guess I was just talking about that. It's one of those things that comes through practice and comes through experience. On a personal level, I turn to all those aphorisms like, the Serenity Prayer and, this too shall pass, and all those kind of things. Those phrases that remind me that, like, when I'm feeling down, when things are tough, like, I will be able to get through it. So certainly kind of personal level, I think that's how I build my resiliency. And then things like, for example, meditation can be super helpful for resiliency, because again, it helps you kind of zoom out and get things into kind of a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'll put in the plug for meditation. My New Year's resolution this year was to start up a meditation practice. I never had, and it sounded very overwhelming to me, but I've been doing it really consistently. So just for a few months now, and I'm just going online and finding a 10 or 12-minute morning meditation. And it really helps. And I share it only because if you don't have that practice, it has an immediate effect. I mean, I'm sure the longer you do it, the more you can gain. But I would say to people, it's not too late. So if that isn't something that you have now, you can adopt it. And it's easy, right? And I personally found it as a very grounding way to start my days. And I'm grateful for it now during these times because I can just tap into that.
Good time that you chose.
Well, we haven't really talked about this. You touched on it, James, but parents, this is a whole new world. I know I have two teens. One is online school, one is school. This is in Seattle Public Schools. And then my husband's a teacher, so he is also at home not working. So we have various degrees of working, not working, different ages in the house, 4 people, 3 cats, etc. What are some of the things that you've heard or that you've found useful as a working parent with kids at home?
Well, again, great question. We've been fortunate with one of our kids that the teacher has sent an email out most days with kind of, hey, here's some worksheets to do and other things, which makes that very easy. I've seen people share schedules. Here's a schedule for a school day, math 9 to 10, something else 10 to 11. Seen a number of education companies. The one that comes top of mind is the Khan Academy, who are one with Khan Academy. You can go create an account with your kids. They can go on there, pick topics they're interested in, and then study through Khan Academy. They have also started doing recommended school schedules, like curricula. So you go to Khan Academy, they've got that, and they go anywhere from I think 2 to 7. They have Khan Academy Kids, and then I think it's 2 years old or 3 years old to 7, and then kind of 8 older, they have a different sort of way of getting to Khan Academy. What else have I seen? Let me think a second. It's been interesting how creative people have got with things, finding things to do with their kids. A friend of mine set up, like in those action movies, you have those rooms that have like those laser things everywhere that you have to kind of like jump through. Like they're really like trying to stay inside. Mikaela, your face is just priceless here. Like,
I'm trying to figure out what they have.
Yeah,
lasers.
so they just got red tape down one of their corridors and just kind of set it all up at angles so the kids can sort of climb their way through it. So you talk about resiliency. It's amazing to me how quickly many parents have found things to do. But I think, leaning on your school community. In my kids' school community, there are lots of ideas being shared, and lean on external resources like, Udemy, Khan Academy. And then the last thing, like, give yourself a break. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't sign up for being a teacher like last week, this week, next week. And I could see that this can become something to create a lot of anxiety, right? It's going to create a lot of what ifs. Like, but if I don't, teach my kids the right math now, then they won't get into this school, then they won't go to that college, then, we create those kind of stories in our head. And I'm somebody who believes like it'll work out in the end.
Yeah.
So I think just give yourself a break right now.
I've noticed too with the older kids, my 15-year-old doing online school, a lot of the same practices that we were talking about for adults, just routine, get out of bed, get outside, right? Because it's very easy for her to just sort of lounge around on the laptop, and she's especially social, but teens can be very social, and a lot of the joy that they get out of school is from their friends. And so I've been trying to even encourage her to, do what we're doing now, or hey, open up Hangouts and just chat with a friend, right? If you're not going to see somebody in person.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of kids doing the same.
Yeah, let me try this next question here from Brad. Do you believe as leaders we have a responsibility to use this opportunity, the new virtual reality, to challenge routine by guiding teams towards new workflows and deliverables? Do we believe teams want direct guidance, or do you believe we risk stressing / burning out those team members?
Brad, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you mean by challenging routine and guiding teams towards new workflows and deliverables. Because I could guess, but I'm not confident in my guess on that one. Okay, you may be, hopefully maybe typing.
Yep. James, did I get you now unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
So I work in the healthcare sector. My name is Brad Mikaela. I work in the healthcare sector and manage a team of about 20 individuals that call and support on our direct line of defense, our healthcare systems, healthcare networks. And so we are virtually locked out of all of our customer sites, right? Not allowed in, not allowed out. So we have folks that have been remote and supporting our customers on site for years. Now we are locked in our homes for the most part. And so now we have time on our hands, right? We have time. We have customers that we still need to support. We can't support them on site. So as I look at those same team members, and their roles have now drastically changed, meaning, let me rephrase, their ability to execute on their job has changed. So now I'm asking those same team members to change the way they're thinking about how they can service their customers, how they can work with one another, right? And so my role as a leader, I think, is to help them quickly pivot and think about what they can do during their workday to accomplish the same goals and objectives that they did while they were at their office, which is a hospital setting, an emergency room, an ICU floor. So the risk that you have there is someone that is not used to that pivot or that direct instruction for how to change the way we work instantaneously, or in this case, within the last 5 or 6 days. So that was the genesis of my question. As a leader of a group, do I come out too hard and risk putting them in a position where they become defensive?
Yeah. So here's my opinion, and I say opinion because I think this is something that a lot of people would think about differently, but here's how I'm thinking about that. So you have a group of people whose approach to their work necessarily has to change for a period of time. Like they can't do their job the way that they were doing it. So the way I would think about this is, if you're open to them doing their jobs a new way once this whole thing is done and passed, what a great opportunity to allow them to kind of co-create and co-author how their work is done. So to me, this feels a lot like an exercise in really empowering people. And you say, like, do you think they want direct guidance, or do you think we risk burning out those team members? If there's extra time right now, because they can't do some of the things they usually do, again, to me, seems like a great way to fill that time. So, okay, let's plan for how we're going to work now, and let's plan for how we're going to work when this whole thing is done, and see what happens. If you start getting signs people are stressed about it, stop doing it. But yeah, it seems like a great opportunity to me.
Thanks for your feedback. Appreciate it, James.
No worries.
So we are going to have a little bit more time at the end here for questions, but James, I'm wondering, just, we've scratched the surface on a number of things. Are there resources or places that you would point people to get more information, especially about, again, managing mental health, anxiety, and these feelings of isolation?
Yeah, I think at that point, I would go kind of zoom back to some of the sort of broad resources, right? Not looking necessarily at mental health work, but kind of zooming back and saying, okay, what resources are there out there? I would, of course, selfishly point you to Silent Superheroes, because it would be kind of literally remiss of me if I didn't do that. But I think organizations like NAMI, so National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a great resource today, and it's a great resource when this crisis is over as well. They provide a number of different services that include education, so learning more about different illnesses, how those illnesses show up, and they provide also services to connect people who are experiencing mental illness with resources in their area. And so, wherever you are, if you're outside the Seattle area, there's, NAMI pretty much all over the place. If you think about crisis care a little bit, I would definitely stick the number for crisis text line in your phone. They provide free, confidential, 24/7 support across the United States. And I think if somebody is in a more serious crisis situation, that's a good resource to have to hand, both either for you to kind of contact them and say, I've got no idea what to do, or something to give somebody who is struggling. So I think those are two great places to go. I would, what was the other one I was going to mention? Okay, I'm blanking for a second. I guess National Institute for Mental Health is a great place. NIMH is a great place to go get resources at this time. And then within your companies, there are services out there like Modern Health or Spring Health or Bravely, who can provide you with access, or your employees with access to coaching resources, therapist resources as well. And I would definitely, again, now and after this whole crisis is done, explore those kind of resources. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience, last year I was leading the people team at Gravity, and we decided to roll out Modern Health in our particular case. And I ran a series of focus groups just to find out if people were interested. I ran 4 focus groups in a week, and I had something like half the company show up to the focus groups. It was crazy, with everybody saying like, yes, get us, like, we want this extra mental health resource. When we did the rollout, we had the head of clinical care do a web conference for us, which had the highest attendance of any sort of learning and development thing we had ever done. Just huge demands for mental health resources in organizations. So I would strongly encourage you to explore bringing in one of those apps or solutions.
That's a good tip. I think also a lot of times the employee assistance programs are underutilized, and people may not realize that there's support there. Sometimes they come with a limited number of free counseling sessions, or the ability to point people toward counseling, or at least help match you up with people in your area. So this can be good as well.
It would be worth...
James, anything else you want to add before we just open it up?
Sure. On the subject of EAPs, I think it would be well worth perhaps just doing a trial run with your EAP to find out how it works from a mental health care perspective, because the quality of the experience varies wildly. There are some good ones and there are some pretty bad ones. Examples of like being given a list of therapists who aren't in network, aren't like even trading anymore, just, a really poor experience for somebody who's in a moment of crisis. So, if you wondered how your EAP works for mental health, and that would be a good time to find out.
That's a great suggestion. I've never actually heard or seen anyone do that, but point well taken. You don't want someone to call in need and get a list of providers who can't be at that. All right. Well, I'm going to pause there, and thank you for joining. We would love to get any feedback you have, so please share. And we will be doing these on some other topics as well. We have one coming up for moms who are working from home. We're also working with our employment attorney from Karen Cross Hempelman to join us for people who have questions more about some of the legal and compliance staffing related issues that are coming up as a result of the virus. And James and I will hang out here for a minute in case. Everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thank you, James, as always, for your wisdom.
You're very kind. You're very kind. Oof, that's a good one from Janelle.
I didn't see that.
It just came in, I think.
Wow, I don't know, Janelle, I think this should be your next book. It's like a really big philosophical question. Oh my goodness. Should we read it? Can anyone answer this at all? I'll read so James can answer.
Okay, good. There you go.
I've had a recurring thought throughout this COVID-19 crisis. As I understand, pandemics are part of our history as humans. Not in any way to diminish the crisis, just pondering, what if this is our big opportunity as a species and a global community to hit reset? How do we as empathetic leaders help people navigate the present, but build energy for how we envision and rebuild the future?
I'm just going to start talking and we'll see where it goes. I'm not going to think before I speak. The first thing that comes to mind is, if I look at the kind of trajectory of politics in the US and the UK, where I'm from, over the last, let's say, decade, I have found myself feeling that it is increasingly bleak. that, you know, it seems like people who should be able to work together and communicate like adults have got kind of more and more, you know, extreme, and at the same time kind of they've pulled the population with them. And I think in many ways it feels like we're as a species farther apart than ever. Like we've got into our kind of camps, and you know, we're kind of staying there and throwing, you know, sticks and rocks at everybody else. I've thought for a while that kind of, okay, how do we get back from that? And my opinion is that the moments in history when things have changed are the moments in history where things have gone badly, badly wrong. So let's take the Second World War as an example. Lots of, you know, terrible political instability in you know, in Europe, and we have to take the, you know, planet to the brink of oblivion to come back, right? And things that came out of Second World War, things like the United Nations. We said we're not doing that again. Like we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, or rather, we're not going to, you know, have, you know, kind of restrictions around nuclear weapons, because it turns out they were a really bad idea. So I feel like it's those moments in history that create the opportunity for change, because we kind of realize like, oh, we are all in this together after all, right? And we can't, you know, it actually doesn't work if we're all separated off into our little distant camps. So, you know, you ask, do I think this is a big opportunity to reset? Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. Suddenly we, you know, we see, oh, we're all very connected and we are all very vulnerable, and we can sit here and like say, well, oh, it's China's fault, or, you know, South Korea did that, you know, badly. But what should be obvious to everyone is, you know, just the vulnerability that we're in. So I think that's the first part. How do we as empathetic leaders help people navigate the present, build energy for how we re-envision and rebuild the future? I mean, just all that comes to mind for me is modeling the behavior that we want to see in others, you know, which would be, in this case, not to blame, not to be angry, to reach out, to connect with, you know, other people, you know, finally see that Republican or Democrat that you thought was a, you know, an idiot as a person, because it turns out that's what they are. And so I think that's, I mean, you know, maybe I've just kind of inhabited 1968 here and I've turned into a hippie or something, but like it's always love. The Beatles wrote a track, All You Need Is Love, right? And I say that and you're like, oh, that song is so cheesy. Like, oh, all you need is love, like just saying that over and over again. But it's profound. It's utterly profound, because there's a line, there's nothing you can do but learn how to be you inside. It's easy. All you need is love. And it's like, yeah, it's that easy. If we could all learn to inhabit ourselves and learn to love ourselves, like all of the world's problems get fixed. And I know it's not as easy as that, but the great thing about the love is about that song lyric is the irony in it, which is it is easy. It's like theoretically it's easy, practically it's a life's work to learn how to love yourself. So how do we as empathetic leaders help people navigate the present? Learn to love ourselves, show that love to other people.
I'm not going to go after that.
Janelle, I'd love to know if that in any way addressed any part of, oh, thank you, there we go. You're too kind.
And I'd also like to say that I could listen to your voice all day.
Is that the accent thing again?
Well, it might be, but it's a nice, very nice male voice. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those odd privilege things. It took me years to realize, living, you know, in the US, that, you know, the accent carries a certain something.
Mm-hmm.
Witches meditation or mindfulness apps and the British accent. One of them is.
It's Headspace, Andy
Uh-huh.
Billiken. Yeah.
There's something to it.
Which is weird because we're always cast as the villains in movies. Right? Yeah, think about like the first Star Wars movie as an example. The entire Imperial army are British and all the rebels are American. Or what's his God, I can't think of his name. One of the guys in like Die Hard. Like there's a great many British evil people out there, according to the movies.
All right. So we've now gone from the Beatles into full-on pop culture. I think we're good. I'm going to call it. Thanks, everybody. And I really hope you'll join us for the next one. Bye now.
Bye-bye.